The deliverable from information analysis is a Business Information Specification, the components of which are an information model, such as a partial entity relationship diagram shown from our previous example, and a set of support specifications for entities depicted on the information model and relationships depicted on the information model, and data elements describing the content of each entity. Again, for the benefit of those folks who've taken my business process analysis tutorials, the data elements will be the same as the ones in the data flows in and out of stores on the business process model. In this section, we'll cover the analysis of data elements, sometimes called data attributes or data fields. This is the detailed level of an information specification. In this section, we're going to specify in detail a data element. I class a data element as the common denominator of many business methodologies. This is not a large section. In it, we'll cover definition of a data element, discovering data elements, a data element naming standard, data element format, content, and domain, and a sample data element specification. First, my definition of a data element, again sometimes referred to as an attribute. This is one I've used for many years, although there are other similar definitions in the technical literature. A data element is a named characteristic, quality, or property which describes some aspect of a business entity and which takes on a value when associated with the occurrence of an entity. The last part of the definition is what separates it from an entity or other nouns in the organization. Data elements take on a value describing a fact about an entity. For example, the city name for a customer. We define a data element using a data element specification containing the data element name, this must be unique, parent entity, could be used across many entities if this is a key data element, state if repeating groups are allowed for the parent entity. Remember we talked in the entity section that a dependent entity could be a repeating group in its parent entity. For example, employee children names could be listed in the entity employee. This is where we would show that the data element is repeated for one parent entity. Its definition description, in other words what it is, its role in the business, in other words its purpose, why we have it. We can also document the events that use this data element, in other words which events may create, retrieve, update and or delete this data element. We can identify global rules that are true for all occurrences of this data element, for example validation criteria, integrity constraints. An integrity constraint might be if a customer's city changes, then the customer postal code will probably change. My parenthetic statement here recommends that we should identify these here only if they are standard across the organization for this data element. Otherwise, leave this for inclusion in individual process specifications. For example, a content validity check may be event-specific or even individual process-specific. And format, content, and domain. For example, date format of month, month, day, day, year, 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 year. For finite definitions, a range of values can be specified along with the format. Units and precision can also be gathered. For example, 0000.01 through 9999.99. I'll show examples of these in this section. How do we discover data elements? Well, most organizations have some form of internal dictionary defining their own data terms that will be invaluable in this task. If there isn't an internal comprehensive dictionary or encyclopedia, and we don't have a data dictionary from process analysis, then we may need to review existing forms, screens, manual files, databases, etc., and conduct personal interviews to capture data element information. Remember, we're looking for data elements that take on a value and belong to an identified entity. During this task, we need to be very careful of aliases, especially if reviewing computer files. For example, we may find the data names account ID, account number, @no, cost ID, customer number, etc., all of which may refer to the same data element. This problem can also be found across manual forms, for example, customer name, subscriber name, policyholder name, etc., and across different departments, as shown in the small example below, where registrant name, ship to name, and bill to name are all aliases for customer name. Of course, at this level of detail, we may find we need other unidentified entities, such as associative or supertype-subtype entities. If your organization doesn't already have a data element naming standard, I'll describe one here. To be able to use data accurately and flexibly requires stable rules governing the naming and definition of data elements throughout the organization. An organization should have its own data dictionary containing all definitions for entities and data elements in the information model. We should utilize a naming standard to ensure unique names and the elimination of alias names. A naming standard could recommend a unique data element name being formed from an entity name, an optional adjective or adjectives, and a reserved word. The table on the screen shows in the first column some sample entities. Obviously, these will be based on the nature of your business. I've shown some sample adjectives. Again, obviously, there are many of these that we can use and we can compound them. The last column shows what I call reserved words. Reserved meaning that these names are not to be used on their own. I find there's typically a common set of these reserved words in an organization based on its industry. Below the table, I've shown an example of a data element name made up of an entity name, 2 adjectives, and a reserved word: part, minimum, reorder quantity. On the subject of specific data element naming, some data elements can be used as the access to an entity. This is a key data element. A key data element is one that uniquely identifies an entity occurrence, so its value must be unique across all occurrences of an entity. However, a key may be comprised of more than one data element. For example, I could access a specific occurrence of a seminar using the seminar description and start date, or the seminar location and start date. I typically find in an established organization what I call design keys, such as account number, usually invented by the account system, or telephone number, invented by the telephone company. These are not facts about an entity, but serve as access mechanisms within the organizations that created them, although we may need to capture them in our organization. Key data elements are indicated in the entity specification. As stated previously, unless it is an invented key, a data element describes some aspect or fact about an entity. For example, seminar start date. The value of a non-key data element is typically not unique across all occurrences of an entity. For example, student title. For each data element, we can gather the element's format and content, etc. Note that these are typically design aspects, and we should be cautious of using old design characteristics in the new design, or dictating any new design characteristics in the analysis stage. For example, in the new design, a textual description may be replaced with an image or graphic. I've shown an example of an existing mailing address data element, a physical address, of a requisition, which may be replaced in the new design with an email address. Also, I've shown an item description data element of the existing requisition form, which may be replaced in the new design with an actual image of the part on a screen. For those data elements that have a finite set of business values, we can document their content as an actual range of values. For example, in my business, I could list the values for seminar title as I have a limited set of seminars. This way, all processes in my business will have the exact same values for seminar title, therefore eliminating aliases. So what do we want to capture for the specification of a data element? Here's a sample data element specification for a data element in my business. It's named Course Group Discount Price. Before I get into this definition, I have to admit this took me over an hour to define, and I'm the head of my company and the one with the most experience in the business. Luckily, not all definitions are as complex as this one. Of course, we should identify the data element name, and we can also date this specification and even identify who was the source of this specification. Then identify the parent entity which contains this data element. In this case, its parent is course. Previously, I mentioned that in my business we have a limited set of courses which we teach in many seminars, but the price is always associated with the course, not the seminar. If this data element is a key for an entity, it may be part of other keys, especially for associative entities. Remember earlier in this section, I gave the example where a data element may be a repeating data element, as in the case of a dependent of an employee. We would state that here. In this case, the data element is not a repeating data element. Next, we define what this data element is in business terms. Here's where it got a little interesting in my business. I remember I'd asked one of my staff to fill in the details of this specification, and she had left my office after the small discussion of this data element being assigned to a course, not a seminar. She came back and asked, "What is this data element to our business?" It was a simple answer. This is the price per student to be given to all clients registering 3 or more students in a single public seminar. Then she asked, if a client registered 3 students and then calls up later and adds 1 more student, do they get a discount on that student? I answered, yes, it's the price for all students of a client once they register 3 students. She then asked, do discounts apply to a client who registered the same student in 3 different public seminars at once? I had to think about that one. Why wouldn't we give a discount in that case? After some thought, I answered, the group discount price does not apply across seminars. In other words, a client registering a student in 3 different scheduled seminars does not receive a discount. The reason for this last policy rule was answered by the next item, role in the business, why we have this data element in the business. I remember my staff person coming back into my office and asking, our seminars are filling up, why give any discounts? That made me think. And we put together the reason. This discount is an incentive to our clients to register at least 3 students at one time in a public seminar. This allows LCI to fill public seminars more quickly and to reach the minimum level for a seminar's economic feasibility. You see, we need to get a minimum number of students to cover the cost of the hotel, seminar room facilities, as well as the instructor travel and lodging expenses. Otherwise, we have to cancel the public seminar. Luckily, cancelling a public seminar was very rare, but it was always awkward because I knew the client also had allocated time and expenses for their signed-up student travel, etc. Next, we can identify the events that may create, retrieve, update, and delete occurrences of this data element. I identified the events client wishes to buy a public seminar, client requests public seminar information, client wishes to change their public seminar enrollment. We can also document the global rules that are true for all occurrences of this data element. That is, identify the rules governing the creation of a new occurrence and the retrieval, updating, and deleting of existing occurrences. Identify these here if they are standard across the organization for this data element. Otherwise, let the process specification in process analysis declare these, especially validation rules that are event specific. I've just noted that this data element value is always equal to 80% of the course student price. This is a data integrity rule also. Finally, we can document the format, content, domain characteristics of this data element. I've identified this is currently a 4-digit positive dollar amount, NNNN, no cents. Now again, I found the specification of this one data element in my business to be quite time-consuming to define. But I was glad that I had it out of my head for this data element and that we could be sure the policy was followed consistently from here on. Now I will ask the same question that I ask in my live seminars at this point. Where is this documented in your organization? We've covered the main components of our information model in the last few sections. We've been conducting what's known as top-down discovery for our model, that is, first entities, then relationships, and then data elements. Of course, they do not need to be discovered in a linear manner. We can concentrate on one entity and its data elements first, then relationships.